Welcome guys. Thank you very much for coming, Jack, and your intro. Certainly this is an topic I'm very passionate about and I enjoy talking a lot about it. So to be here and to be able to share this with you guys, it brings me great pleasure. As the intro sort of talked about, for a long time I've obviously been moving myself obviously, and obviously trying to coach it as well, and that's pretty much where my two passions sort of lie, is obviously movement from the challenges it brings to looking at it, researching it, to then also obviously coaching it as well. As we sort of talked about, my areas are quite diverse, and it's allowed me to, I suppose, taste and gain experience in multiple types of training methodologies and the likes of. From my early days as a track athlete, which was obviously very much promoting athleticism, especially as a decathlete where you train for 10 disciplines, and of course the types of movements you train for is quite diverse, right through to obviously football, which was obviously multi-directional as a field sport, and then powerlifting at the end. And it was this powerlifting, I guess, that really sort of made me think about this concept of strength through stability and what it stands for and what's really important. You know, you go from athleticism right through to powerlifting, and I'm not staying here to bag a particular sport out, but it's so regimented in its way, a lot of isolation, and yes, you're doing compound movements, but nothing is around this concept of stability. And so although I was lifting all this tonnage, I kept coming back to the concept that, well, you know, yes, I may be strong, but if I want to chase my 3-year-old around the park, why do I feel like I'm going to pull a hamstring? You know, so there was this aspect of conditioning and I suppose physical ability that was lacking for all the strength. So this is certainly where I'm coming from. It's given me great insight into what I actually really appreciated the most, and that's why I'm here sharing it with you as well. This unfortunately is my new reality. I no longer have a sporting career currently. I am a father of 3 triplets and a 2-year-old as of 7 weeks ago. So I no longer have a reality in movement world other than coaching it and a little bit of training on the side, obviously. All right, so let's really try and get on the same page regarding what I'm talking about exactly when it comes to strength through stability. And I've written here the concept that energy is more easily transferred through stable joints, thus enhancing the strength of the primary movers and making human movement not only safer, but more efficient. And that as a context for, I suppose, the performance world, but also for our average Joe. And obviously, as personal trainers, that's what we spent 95% of our time with. It's trying to get people off their seats, off their bums, into moving. And of course, it's like, well, okay, we want them to move, but how exactly are we going to make them move? If they want to get stronger, let's not chuck them into some sort of environment whereby it doesn't transfer to their everyday needs, which we already know about. We call it functional training, the likes of. But I guess it's a subtopic of that, and trying to get a little more specific on that. So the objective for me today here is to argue that every strength exercise prescribed to the common person, of course, should be, should have a layer of strength through stability. And of course, once they have that layer of stability, then sure, we can branch them out and they can get specific on whatever goals they may have, running a marathon, climbing Mount Everest, or whatever you may want to. There's a few ways I want to talk about this, or there's a few elements I want to address today that sort of encompass the idea of strength through stability. Obviously, we'll look at strength and the history of it very quickly. I won't spend a lot of time on that. The difference between global and postural strength, obviously postural we deal a fair bit of work with, and then obviously global is probably more what the PTs are used to. Range of movement, where does this fit into it? When it comes to muscle length and the likes of, neuromuscular patterning and the importance of it, and that ties into the kinetic chain as well. The two of them are pretty heavily linked. And of course, then we're going to finally try and bring it together and put it into context. So look at what does strength through stability look like from a allied health professional example or perspective, and then also PTs. And then we'll try and bridge that gap. And this is probably one of the most, the biggest issue I've seen in the strength world that separates between allied health professional and PT. There's a massive gap there that needs to be closed in some way. All right, so strength through stability. The history of strength, of course, ancient Romans pretty much dictate the likes of that, with obviously the Spartans that were have obviously recently been glorified through movies, etc., etc. But there's no doubting that the place they've got with the strength world is very much true, and the ancient Olympics and the likes of. And then we look at the movements that they prescribed, it obviously was very much full body, and although the concept of strength through stability wasn't quite there, it at least had a huge functional element to it. And it was very specific, the movements that they created and did, to their training needs, or their specific needs. It's interesting to note that the Spartans actually, they only ruled Rome for about 20,000 years, which in the schemes of things wasn't actually that long, simply because they were so passionate about obviously having a physical presence, and their army was only foot soldiers. As soon as artillery was brought in, of course, it doesn't matter how strong or how physical you are, a boulder coming at your body isn't really going to do much. Your physicality isn't going to do much to the boulder. So if we look at the a little bit of a timeline of it, obviously Belgium was the first sort of signs of gymnastics and when it was first formed. 1700s again, supposedly Russia created the kettlebell, which again is obviously around the concept of functional training. But interesting, I was trying to research this and I couldn't find anything on it. Apparently in Greece, obviously the Museum of Ancient Olympia actually has a kettlebell in their ranks, and that's obviously BC compared to 1700, but I couldn't find the artifact on the website, and I was struggling with obviously the Greek language, so I couldn't quite work it out. Arthur from Germany, in a little more recent times, 1908, of course he was known more of a freak show, which they strengthened that era was obviously known as not something you necessarily would want or need or you try and portray, and these guys were obviously circus acts. Yeah. But the concept of someone being able to hold 170 kilos above the head in one hand through one shoulder is pretty astounding in itself, you know. And certainly, again, I'm mirroring or trying to create this picture of functionality of movement over the years, where everything was around specificity and they had plenty of stability through whatever movements or strength movements they were trying to create. And then, of course, a little more recent to us, we had this guy on the left, which sort of revolutionised the fitness industry. We created it, in point of fact. Love him or hate him, Arnie obviously put it on the map and made this concept of bigger is better, and it's obviously very fashionable in a sense, and it's what everybody wanted all of a sudden. Whereas prior to this time, muscle was only known as a freak show. So for that perspective, we have to thank him. The problem, of course, what's happened is he's created this this body that everyone seems to idolise, that's created around an isolation model. And for years, for decades, of course, this has been trying to, we've been trying to phase this out and actually try and create something that's more realistic for the average person, everyday needs. We know that, yes, okay, this looks fantastic, the aesthetics is amazing, but if we ask them to actually perform something that an everyday needs that he actually needs to be able to do, it doesn't quite carry over. And then, of course, we move into 2000, and it was about 2000 where the concept of functional training or strength really kicked in. The likes of Paul Chek, that sort of made the Swiss ball very fashionable, even though obviously the birthing ball was designed by the Swiss physios for labour and the likes of, and they got obviously fantastic results with heightened neuromuscular patterning and the likes of. But it certainly carried through. It's been very good, and then, of course, again, love him or hate him, CrossFit, the first international games was held in 2011, and as a student just last week critiqued me on the first CrossFit games was actually 2006, but that was in the backyard. So I said, all right, I'll get you on the international side. And of course, these movements are all, for the most part, not that we walk around walking on our head, but a little more functional in nature, and they do promote the use of stabilisers and what have you. The problem, of course, is that the majority of our clients do what we're currently doing. And they get up out of their chair, and then they go to the gym, and of course they are promoted that. And of course, as we can see there, there's a slight problem. There's a gap here between functional training is best, right? Well, we're all talking about it. It needs to be more of that line where it comes from strength. But of course, we're going from that position there, more times than not carrying too much than we should, or our clients do, to movements that are complex, extreme, and of course put a lot of force through the body. And of course then we have problems down the track with that. All right, so global versus postural. Obviously we just looked at Arnie, and I want to look at that in a little more depth as well. The likes of the guy on the left versus the guy on the right, the difference is obviously huge. And in this regard with global, if we're going to try and define it, we're looking at traditional exercises are isolated movements in general. So exercises such as a leg press, a lat pull down, curls, extensions, etc., etc. The key point here is they have a high focus on primary movers, more so than stabilizers. And it often, of course, is performed in a stable environment, which is the other kicker as well. It's a key point there. So, of course, you have this issue around the primary movers becoming extremely strong, creating a heap of force, generating a heap of force, and you've got these poor little stabilizers that are really struggling with the amount of force that's being generated, and there we, of course, run into issues. Benefits? Well, of course, the reason why the guys did it in the 70s and 80s and the likes of is because of hypertrophy. That's what we were trying to get out of it, and you can do it very well. It's a safer lifting environment. I mean, yes, we might start our older adults and the likes of in some isolation environments or stable environments because they have none, but eventually we want to go down that road with stability with them as well. Allows individual muscles to be targeted, goes without saying. And of course, the key point here is improved force output equals greater strength and hypertrophy gains, which is the name of the game, especially in the bodybuilding world at least anyway. So the concerns with global muscles and the likes of when we're spending a fair bit of time with them, well, our average client wants to be able to go and do something like this. Very popular these days, adventure races. So they spend all this time training their global muscles in stable environments, and then we go and chuck them on an obstacle course for 15 kilometres, which they probably haven't run actually until they actually go into the day, and they need to be stable. Okay? So of course, what happens? Something similar to that. So you're looking at knee injury. And of course, who's the main beneficiary of this? Those guys. Yep, they love it. Bring them in, roll them in. They're there and waiting, ready to go. If we look at the flip side, and from my perspective, obviously from allied health professionals' perspective, postural strength is all around obviously your stabilizers having a fantastic posture, staying up nice and tall, which is absolutely important. But of course we need those stabilizers to be strong and then transfer to dynamic stability. So movements, adding movement to that posture that's already in a nice alignment and still being able to maintain that posture. And this is, I guess in a nutshell, where we're talking about this carryover and trying to bridge the gap between having good postural strength and obviously transferring that to dynamic strength. So the benefits of postural strength obviously gains through stability, exactly what we're looking for. Greater transferability of strength into human movements. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about kinetic chains and neuromuscular patterning and the likes of. Rapid gains in performance can be found due to energy leaks. So by energy leaks, I'm talking about obviously an unstable joint. We're going to talk about the kinetic chain soon. However, if I'm transferring all this force through my body to a distal point, which in this case might be my arm if I'm going to throw a ball, if I have a joint that's unstable along the way, then there's no way I can distribute and create so much more force on that distal point, being maybe throwing a ball or what have you. So energy leaks, of course, has a detrimental effect on performance And not only that, it creates more pressure on the distal point as well, because it's been asked to do more work than it should. Now, in the case of throwing a ball, which we're going to talk about in a second, our shoulder is obviously very much a distribution joint. It's not a force producer. And so, of course, when we go to a gym and we train for strength, it's not really designed to sit there and try and lift as much weight as we can overhead, in a static position. It's there to transfer it, hence why it has so much range, and it is quite vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable joint. So for postural strength, obviously creates more all-round athleticism. It allows us to be able to perform a multitude of movements in multiple directions and not injure ourselves, basically. Key players, these I would hope we all probably know pretty well, not only just in the static posture world, but it transfers right through to dynamic as well, every time. The likes of that glute med, working with the length tension relationship with the VMO, your TA, it goes without saying. External rotators, which are always being put on stretch because of that awful, obviously, kyphotic position. Lower traps, poor old things get hung out to dry because those upper traps are so dominant, whether in our working day with stress or again even in the gym, it transfers as well. And then of course, I've got there rhomboids and your thoracic anterior, which come together with a nice fascial plate there. So all of those are obviously pretty critical players and certainly key muscles that we need to know not only just in the postural world, but also the strength world as well. And if our exercises don't have a huge influence on those particular muscles, along with the global movers, then we're going to be struggling. I just wanted to look into lumbo-pelvic region in particular. Obviously, this is our central hub, as I call it. And if this is not strong and stable, then it's obviously going to affect up the line and also down the line as well. And I totally understand that, if our shoulders aren't, and we've got if our shoulders aren't working properly and we've got, say, upper cross syndrome, then of course that's going to affect down the line as well. However, as a central point and our center of gravity is based in the middle, I believe that certainly in my experience it's had the most influence. So if we go through, of course, our glute med and our TA, which are two key players with stability in this region, the likes of, if that glute med is not strong, then of course you're going to get that lateral hip tilt, which of course cascades down the leg and sends everything internally rotating. While as the TA obviously is a trunk supporter, especially with our lumbar spine, as we know, if it's not working and it's not being engaged properly, then there's no way we can ask our body to do basic gymnastics exercises and the likes of that we find in performance environments. And of course, here is some basic context and seeing it carried over. If we had, us as PTs had $1 for every time we saw a squat like that in a gym, or a jump squat, we'd all be millionaires. Just as my brother, for example, he's an Ironman, he's completed a couple now. The poor guy sits behind a desk all day, and I'm pretty sure initially his knees cracked like that over a bike. And over many, many years of cycling and God knows how many kilometres, I'm sure it'll be one of the key players or reasons why he now has knee pain. Something so small, so subtle, which initially, if you're going to bike down the road to get some milk, wouldn't be a problem. But of course, if you're doing it for hours on end, just that constant wear and tear, that misalignment, not working properly, and of course, he's now suffering for it. And same to be said, of course, for the hips, because his glutes aren't strong either. Focal point here around functional training. So I keep coming back to, okay, so we're all being taught as fitness professionals to make the training more functional and the likes of, but if our clients are already coming to us with poor stability and they have no stability in this region, then how are they supposed to perform movements that are supposed to be more complex, more full body, require better neuromuscular patterning? It's just not going to happen. And of course, they're going to fall back to their default patterning, which is dysfunctional and obviously has a huge amount of imbalances. which isn't great. So it's almost like we're killing them kindly in a way. And that's the result again. I love those guys. Because in the day, that's what it comes back to. So an interesting point with, I wanted to touch on a couple of studies with you guys regarding the key points I've just made there. And this one is quite prudent to me. So it was a US study in 2013. It looked at baseballers. And I used this one because of obviously the massive carryover as a primal movement. And basically what they looked into was how well the baseball players' stability, or how well they could stabilize through their lumbar pelvic region, and what sort of correlation it had with upper body injuries. And what they found was obviously the weaker that the lumbar-pelvic region was, more times than not, the greater the injuries were up top, put simply. And that was simply just because they had more pressure being placed through their distal point at the top. The lumbar-pelvic region wasn't doing their job to stabilize the movement. And then, of course, up top, there was more wear and tear going through the glenohumeral joint, unfortunately, because of it. And the reason why I like this is just because it carries over to so many facets and so many movements. Something as simple as bringing those hips through carries through to punching, kicking, obviously running and the likes of. So we can use this study and use it as a good gauge to carry through to just about most human movements that we as humans perform. The other one that I had here was regarding runners. And this 2009 study looked at, they took a group of recreational and competitive runners, 5,000 metre runners, and they applied a 6-week program of core exercises. So looking at the TA in particular and the trunk stability. And the runners that did the program, they had to do a series of 4 or 5 movements, 3 sets of each, all on a stability ball. From back extensions to crunches to side planks to hovers and so on and so on. And at the end of the 6-week program, they brought them back together. Obviously, the other group didn't have to do any core strength, while both groups did the same running program. And they did a 5K time trial again. And of course, the average improvement of the group that did the core training over 6 weeks came out as a 47-second gain in their time trial, versus only 17 for the group that was just doing the running program. So again, really stresses the point of obviously the strength in this region and what sort of benefit it has. Range of movement. It's a bit it's a bit contentious, this one with me. I'm far from a yoga master, and I don't think I ever will be. Certainly my training partners and the likes of can contest for that. And it's certainly important, obviously, to have that range of movement, and it plays its part. But at the same time, in a nutshell, I would argue that too much range of movement would also play a poor role as well. All right, let's get into it. So if we looked at obviously the importance, this one I love this study because it transfers to so many gym goers, and I'm going to be sexist here and say particularly males, because males love to chuck a heap of weight in the bar and forget about technique and worry more about their ego, etc., etc. And so what this study did was looked at same weights program, 2 groups. One group did the program through a partial range of movement. So let's say a basic squat, partial range, versus the other group that did all their movements through a full range. So obviously at least 90, if not bum to ground. As I said, same resistance training protocols were followed regarding how quickly they moved, for example, so their time under tension and the likes of. 12-week program, and they came back and they retested their results. Now, of course, the group that trained through a full range of movement far exceeded their results than the group that went through a partial, not just through strength gains, but also hypertrophy gains. They had better success as well. But the point I love about this study was that they didn't do a deload period. So for the same amount of time, for 12 weeks, they were told, don't touch a bar, dumbbell, nothing, leave them alone. Come back and we'll retest you again. And of course, the guys that went through a full range of movement again outshone the guys that were doing partial range, and they'd held on to their strength, they'd held on to their hypertrophy better than the group that they had only worked through a partial range. So of course I love throwing this one around to all the guys on the gym floor and telling them why they should take some of the weight off the bar and actually work through a full range. Obviously in this regard, with strength, it's the extra stress being placed on the muscles. So obviously the more stress that's on the muscle through a fuller range, the better adaptation we're going to get due to the greater tearing and the likes of. Laxity. All right, so if I'm going to look at the reasons why maybe range of movement might not be such a great idea. In the strength world, of course, where I'm talking, too much laxity in the joints obviously creates a joint that's unstable. And yes, I would say for the most of our clients, this isn't too much of an issue. If anything, they need to go the other direction. They need to get more flexible. A typical case of this one would be the average client that goes and does yoga 5 times a week. And although yoga can get quite advanced and actually have a good deal of stability through it, if they're just constantly doing basic flexibility within their yoga sessions 5 times a week because they love the feeling, they're on a little high when they work out, only the range of movement is going through the roof and there's no real strength being added to it. Simply because they're not increasing the complexity of the type of yoga that they're doing. It's not getting more advanced. So then of course they're not doing their handstands and the likes of, which you can find in a yoga environment to add that level of strength to the mobility that they're getting. And then of course, increased laxity increases the general wear and tear of a joint, and we really run into issues around that as well when it comes to everyday life, slipping on a curb, and the likes of. And especially when you start adding strength, which is that final point there. When you start taking someone that's very lax into that strength world and there's no stability, it's, you're really asking for trouble. Well, this one's an obvious. We don't need to worry too much about this side. Problem with lack of range of movement, obviously in the strength world, we're spelling out the obvious here, is greater wear and tear, greater increase of tearing on the soft tissue, decreases in performance. Well, we found that in the study I just gave you guys. And then of course, muscular imbalances that start to be created and they compensate for that lack of range. There are classic examples of that might be tight hamstrings, and of course that can be caused by the hip flexors being too tight. With that, obviously the lower back kicks in a general squat because of that excessive forward flexion, and all of a sudden they've got a ridiculously strong lumbar spine and really weak glutes. So then what's right? And this is sort of the motto that I've had for a long time now, and again, this has pretty much been created from my track and field days. If we couldn't perform a movement correctly, then obviously we would have the weight stripped off us and we would do it with the bare bones, just body weight, working through a feint until we could get to the full range of movement to execute that primal movement pattern correctly. And we would supplement that with mobility work, release techniques where necessary. Yeah. So, in the fitness world, if my client can perform all the primal movements that most humans are designed to do, squat, lunge, bend, twist, etc., then I'm happy. No more, no less. I don't necessarily need them to be able to have their head touching their knees or working through some other ridiculous range of movement. However, at the same time, I need them to be able to perform basic strength movements that they're coming here to become stronger in. And if we've got that as a happy medium, then I'm really happy. Yeah. And as I say, for the most part, our clients come to us not being able to do these. So the majority of the time, people do need to become better with their range of movement so you can work through that fuller range and really reap the benefits of whatever strength program they might be trying to do. neuromuscular patterning. And I'm sure you guys will have talked a fair bit about this in the last couple of days. And it's really no different in the strength world. It's really quite prudent, and it has a massive influence on your performance, not only just as an average Joe looking to obviously perform human movement better, but also performance as well. I've got there, from a strength perspective, neuromuscular patterning is a sequence in which muscles fire throughout the body in order to produce force so a movement can be completed. Pretty simple. I couldn't find an old photo of me throwing the disc, so I just stole this one. But as a story I can give you, I first picked up a disc when I was 13 in a little town called Napier, if anyone knows, in New Zealand. And I had a coach that had a heart of gold. He would do anything for us, obviously as kids, and would come down on a Saturday or whatever if I wanted to keep practicing my disc and the likes of, which I was very thankful for because I loved throwing it. And I was there for 2 to 3 years. And over that time, of course, the coach, the heart of gold was there, but the qualifications weren't, and put in simple. And the imbalances that I created, or the timing and the technical faults that were created throughout these years, still haunt me today. So I got picked up and went to the Millennium Institute of Sport when I was 19 or 20. And I was working with, we had a couple of Olympic coaches up there. And for the 3 years I was there, they couldn't iron out the imbalances that were created over 3 years when I was at a junior track club. Which says a lot. And for my hurdles as well, I had an awfully slow trail leg with hurdles. When I was 14, I was probably here, so I had a distinct advantage, obviously. And when you're over low hurdles as a kid, you just have to lift your leg and use the momentum you've got sprinting down the bloody track. And when it came to, when I was 20, we're obviously on the 3'6". And I had ingrained this horribly, horribly slow trail leg. And the time I was there, I still couldn't, over 2.5, 3 years of training, they still couldn't iron it out, get it right, so that I was actually dragging it through nice and quick and getting it sharp on the ground. Amazing. And even now as a master, I pick up the disc, and there's a guy by the name of Eric who looks after me in Brisbane, and he's trained a couple of Commonwealth athletes. And the same cues, after 15 years, are still coming out of him as what they did when I was in Auckland in the Institute. It's incredible. So my point here is obviously what we do here is, at Average Joe, we sit down and we train these neuromuscular patterns, and then we ask our client to come off that chair for 8 hours and into a performance environment, a gym, and perform a squat, a box squat, a push press, or whatever you may want to. And of course, you've got these massive patterning issues that have been created over time that we're trying to undo. You know, as a good physio once said, if you really want to fix yourself, obviously stop sitting down all day. It's those hours that we spend sitting down that really reinforces those neuromuscular habits and patterns. And this is obviously where we're leading now. We're getting back on track regarding the Average Joe. What's wrong with the picture? Well, of course, we know very well what's wrong with the picture. But in the voice, it's hamstrings are short, hip flexors are jammed, gluteals are underactive, lumbar erectors are overactive, abdominals are underactive, shoulder internal rotators are overactive, scapular retractors are inactive, upper traps are overactive, and lower traps are underactive, for the most part. And that, in a nutshell, is what we deal with. 9 or 10 times in not only a gym environment, but the allied health world as well. We sort that out between release techniques and activation techniques, and then we at least have them on the right path. We have them going down a road that we're really happy with. The problem is, our clients don't perceive they have any pain, or they don't have any pain. And of course, they go to the gym because they're over sitting down all day, and they go and try and do that, as a classic example. And that's the basic Olympic movement. It's an overhead squat. We use it as an assessment tool to see what's going on with our clients. And it's really complex. If you've got imbalances and mobility issues anywhere in the body, that'll show it. And add some weight to that as well, and well, you're asking for either a lumbar spine or a dislocated shoulder. Yeah. And of course, that's the result. They are ticking time bombs, unfortunately, our clients. If the lack of knowledge and the lack of respect for the patterning they actually have isn't shown. If we just disregard it and go, right, well, we've got to get rid of those 10 kilos that Jane or John wants to lose. We know the best way for that is metabolic training or high impact circuit and the likes of. Right, let's go. And they're into it. Of course, that's the issue. On the flip side of that, of course, well, we're trying to, good PTs or fitness professionals will find a happy medium. Try and find a happy place where we as fitness professionals or movement therapists will be appeasing what we see and what needs to be fixed. But at the same time, John doesn't really care about this stuff, and I just want to lose the gut so I can keep up with my kid. He outruns me and he's 3. Yeah, that's all he really worries about. So if you can sort of appease both areas, then you're onto a winner from a business perspective, basically. All right. The Connect chain is obviously, it follows through on neuromuscular patterning, and we touched on it earlier on as well as an example with energy leaks. So as a quick definition, from a strength perspective, it's the effective transfer of energy through to a distal point. So we've got a shot put on the right, we've got a high row or a upright row, if you want to call it. Obviously full body would be from the ground and up, so it's actually full body. And we're using a series of movements through our joints where force has been produced, and obviously we're trying to transfer that force or that energy onto the object that we're trying to lift or throw, the likes of. If our patterning in any way is incorrect, then we're going to lose a heap of force, not only just through weaknesses, but timing as well. We can't transfer the force from the ground through our quads and through our glutes, get our full hip extension, so that by the time we get to this point here, the bar just pops, or the ball just goes. Again, for that thrower, it's if I can't transfer my energy from all my weight being loaded on this leg, big drive through that hip, and there's a bit of a pop, and it just goes out through the arm as if it was effortless. Yep. There's a reason why Olympic weightlifting is a sport in the Olympics. It's because of that timing. The difference between getting some ridiculous weight off the ground or not is literally milliseconds, and those that can best transfer their energy or their force being produced take home the medals. So again, it's important for our clients as well. If they can't get this Connect chain for a basic squat right, then they're going to be reprogramming poor neuromuscular patterning and the likes of, and nothing's really going to change. If anything, they're only going to overemphasize the issues they already have. I guess we're coming back to this concept of killing them kindly. So in summary of what we've said so far, poor stability plus poor range of movement plus poor neuromuscular patterning equals an ineffective Connect chain, and then of course there's ineffective strength, which is what we're talking about to start with. Strength through stability is in fact that. It's a combination of all, and we need to have all of them. Something as simple as that might just be around coordination. Coordination can taught. Someone that is uncoordinated, assuming they don't have the neuromuscular imbalances or dysfunctions around the joints. Okay, so I wanted to pull it all together and talk about this topic in context of the allied health professional versus the personal trainer. Now we know there's obviously huge differences between the two, and in many situations the allied health professional sees the personal trainer for the most part as the cowboy in the fitness professional world, or the health world, which in a lot of cases rightly so. We do 12 weeks, spend $5 grand on a course, and allied health professionals spend at least 3 years and about 50 grand. and the range of movement that comes out, or the range of knowledge around functional anatomy and applied science is huge. Yep. And of course, we come from a rehab perspective where allied health professionals do, where obviously it's pain relief, it's trying to get our clients just functioning properly so they have full range of movement and the likes of. But then of course we come from the other end, which is supposed to be a performance environment, a small performance environment, and also trying to alleviate basic body issues around body weight, body fat percentages and the likes of. And what I'm finding as I get older and older and I spend longer in the industry between the two, as I said, it's a skills gap. How can we expect a client who has got knee pain to go to a physio, for example, and the physio relieves the pain through correcting biomechanical faults, give them a series of basic activation exercises maybe to take home if they're doing their job well, because not all physios do. Finish that, and then they go, okay, good, I'm pain-free, I'm going to go back into the gym and start doing my gym environment. But of course the gym environment is about 12 times more complex and has a heap more force and the likes of being created through their body, and the exercise that they learnt here and the strength that they've gained can't cope or deal with then the complexity of the movements and the strength world that the personal trainer then goes and prescribes. And sometimes there's a carryover. Sometimes the physio knows some more advanced movements from a basic clam, for example. Okay, what comes after a clam? Because I'm about to start doing box jumps when I go back to my personal trainer. Yeah. The personal trainer, of course, sometimes knows what a clam is, but doesn't know the exercises that might progress safely outside of doing a bodyweight squat or a lunge. Yeah. And so it's this skills gap that I like to try and work in and I suppose educate. Obviously I come from PT perspective. I'm about to say it in a second, but it's definitely our responsibility. Clients are coming to us wanting to do a bodyweight chin-up for the first time, or squat double their body weight, or whatever. So, okay, well if that's our responsibility to get them there, it's our responsibility to get them there safely. So therefore, my education program, of course, is tailored to the PT. So what does it look like? As I sort of touched on then, client goes to the physio or the allied health professional with shoulder pain. They do some release work, some basic activation work to get some muscles working, and they head back in the gym and do the same chin-up movements that they're trying to do to become proficient at chin-upping by themselves, which of course is way too advanced from a TheraBand. Clams for a glute med exercise, back to COPD, let's load the bar up, let's get that bar up. Doesn't quite work. As I said, whose responsibility is it? It's definitely the personal trainers, because it's us that has to deal with the end goal that the client wants to achieve. And so of course, for personal trainers to be able to successfully prescribe functional or strength training, a personal trainer needs to be able to prescribe corrective exercises that progress a client from rehabilitation that was provided from the allied health professional. And that in a nutshell is what is a major downfall regarding this skills gap is, simply because the PT unfortunately doesn't have the full understanding or the knowledge base around functional movement and functional exercise, anatomy, etc., etc. And this in context is strength through stability. That's what it is. It's the ability to be able to create a stable base so then you can go and do a chin-up by themselves and the likes of. And if there's a key, I suppose, training methodology that you would look at, it's obviously unilateral movements. And this is how we start bridging the gap. Right? So unilateral movements is just a fancy name for a single limb exercise. And again, we already do them from our basic stuff like our clams. Right? Obviously, it allows the client to feel the movement, to feel what's going on. In this case, it's a glute med. It allows the client to also improve that neuromuscular patterning. For our scap retractors and depressors, then it would be something as simple as pulling our shoulder back in line just through our scaps, which for the average person is notoriously difficult to do. All so jammed up through into rotators, a nice hungry bicep that wants to just do all the work for their rowing movements, and of course trying to pull that shoulder back and down just becomes more like a swing, they can't, or an elevation, because they just can't do it. So it allows them to feel the way through it, and that's very much on the simple end of strength through stability. And I've got plenty of movements that would progress along a unilateral line, which I'll show you in a second as well. Examples. Again, we had a single arm row. I've got them there on the lunge. All right. The key aspect of unilateral stuff that I love is the fact that we have so much weight going through one side of our body, and we have to work so hard to fight that weight and stay, in this case of a row or even a push, is stay square on it. So much more stability through the pelvis and the lumbar region is created just to try and deal with that extra load that's been created. It's one thing I say to PTs all the time is, okay, yes, can you lift as much weight in that position as what you would be able to do a seated row? Sit down and, well, no, of course not. You're not going to be able to. However, the extra benefits that come from the unilateral movements for the average Joe's perspective is huge. Right? As I said, lumbar pelvic stability, knee stability, even foot. Foot gets a massive workout having to try and stabilize this unstable environment while they're executing the strength movement through their back. And so it's these sorts of movements that would follow on from just doing a basic scap retraction or your external and internal rotators that would find an allied health professional. Your single leg Romanian, which comes from a yoga position, that's deviated from the T position where arms coming out and the legs up in the air. Fantastic for that lumbopelvic stability. And of course you've got exercises here like your single arm snatch for that improvement of your kinetic chain and neuromuscular patterning. Research paper here, it was a Spanish research paper that looked into youth footballers, and they got half the footballers in the club to come down and perform plyometric based movements before training sessions. And some of them did just unilateral movements. So a simple example of that would be a basic hop left and right. Some of them did a bilateral and unilateral movements, and obviously a group did none at all. And of course the winner came out, the guys that did just unilateral plyometric movements had significantly greater results in their time trials, their shuttle tests and the likes of. So a nice little compliment there to unilateral movements. And the other one there I had was the US study regarding that glute med again. And they took 5 various squatting techniques, and they found that the single leg squat had the best results when it comes to obviously not only just neuromuscular activation, but better stability long run through that pelvic region. So it really just adds weight or adds strength to the concept of unilateral movements providing better dynamic stability across our body as a whole. And it really is quite important. As far as education goes, this is unilateral movements in general is where there's a massive fall down in the education system, and especially from a strength perspective anyway. All right, I've got some context here for you. So what I did is I took a heap of videos that I've created for my program and mashed them together and put it in context of what we might find in a typical allied health professional, and then what we might see in a PT world and the gap between them. So a CLAM, again, we're obviously in the allied health professionals clinic, something that's pretty simple. really effective as an activation and getting that neuromuscular connection there. Same with this, it's just a basic heel kick for the glute max. Hip raises again. Very simple movement that, again, many PTs know these, that's cool, and they apply them. Some use them as activation exercises before the start of their sessions. Crab walks with a bungee, again, really simple. Throw your client the bungee as a warm-up once they've obviously done their mobility work. And squats against the wall, right? So I've got a towel there under my right leg. All right, so the gap begins. So this is where you sort of start going, okay, what am I prescribing between a squat and squats against the wall? All right, so an eccentric focus on a box. All right, 5 touches around the points. All right, just around the cones, like so. Just using a disc, or I've got there a laminated piece of paper. And again, it's just a low advancement again from that single leg stuff against the wall. Single leg Romanians. All right. Really poor example on this one because I'm yabbering away trying to teach it, and then of course I lose my balance. But again, right. Very effective and really good. Single leg box squat. Right. Obviously I'm seated there, so it takes the pressure off. We can even give clients a stick to hang on to because it's obviously a big gap. Then of course the gap closes and we're coming into the PT world now, what you typically find. I've added a knee raise to that lunge, but of course it doesn't need to be a knee raise there at all. That would be one. All right. A 3-point lunge with a bar, all right, and various multi-directional planes. Weighted squats, you'll find hundreds of those obviously in a gym environment. Right, and the likes of. Yep, so, and you can see there that that gap is quite pronounced regarding the really, really simple stuff that we'd find in the allied health professionals clinic, right through to those last 3 movements where we'd typically find the average PT would start. And it's that gap, as I keep talking about, that needs to really be addressed. And of course, the only way that's going to happen, typical set 4 in the PT world is about 20 contact days. And is accompanied with around 20 hours of work experience, which isn't really going to cut it. So that's where the biggest problem lies. Of course, our governments have created this situation because of the obesity epidemic. We need more professionals in the industry to deal with the growing demand, and that's why so many RTOs have popped up. And that's why the standards have been lowered to try and get more people into the market. Well, of course, we have consequences with that as well. And so this is what I do just to finish up. So this is sort of like it's a bridging course. It's something that PTs would do in between after they come out of their set 4, and it teaches them exactly that, what they need to know for the average Joe, the typical issues that come out, and how to address basic dysfunctions without calling themselves by no means a rehab specialist. They're just a bit of prehab. It's for them to be able to walk in and see, okay, my clients are just gently forward, the hips are sunk into this duck walk type position. Let's see if we can address that first before we start jumping them onto box jumps, split jumps, and all the other crazy exercises that they want to, I suppose, do with their clients. All right, so that's all it does there. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation.